I often get the question, why don't Jesuits wear the habit anymore? I'm going to try to answer that question and maybe get down to the heart of what that question is really all about. Let's go back to 1965, where Pope Paul VI wrote Perfecte Caritatis, right? This was a decree on the adaptation and renewal of religious life. So at the time, you had a lot of religious orders wearing habits that were very distinct, right? So you may have seen, I think some of them look kind of wild, by our standards today, look pretty wild. You might have seen nuns where what would have been a veil instead looks like a flying goose on top of their head or whatever, So Pope Paul VI, it looks like he's trying to kind of calm some of that down a little bit and pull back on some of that stuff when he says the following in paragraph 17 of that letter. He says, "The religious habit, an outward mark of consecration to God, should be simple and modest, poor, and at the same time becoming. In addition, it must meet the requirements of health and be suited to the circumstances of time and place and to the needs of the ministry involved. The habits of both men and women religious, which do not conform to these norms, must be changed." So you can see he's coming and he's saying, I don't want you all to wear these crazy, extravagant, outrageous habits, okay? This is in 1965. Fast forward, let's say just 15 years, right? And it was like everybody said, oh, we don't have to wear a habit at all. And everybody's not wearing a habit anymore. And it was like everybody was getting out of wearing a habit. And so John Paul II comes in his letter, Vita Consecrata, which is they had a synod. It was this post-synod, post-synodal apostolic exhortation, Vita Consecrata. It's a fantastic document. Everybody should read it. He says, since the habit is a sign of consecration, poverty, and membership in a particular religious family, I join the fathers of the synod in strongly recommending to men and women religious that they wear their proper habit, suitably adapted to the conditions of time and place. So he's not like opposite of Pope Paul VI. He's taken into account what he had said, but he's saying, hey, everybody, wear a habit. Like, go back to wearing your habit. And then he continues with this down towards the bottom of that very same paragraph. He says, institutes which from their origin or by provision of their constitutions do not have a specific habit should ensure that the dress of their members corresponds in dignity and simplicity to the nature of their vocation. So that's a big if, right? Institutes which from their origin or by the provision of their constitutions. He's talking about something like the Jesuits. You see, the Jesuits, founded by St. Ignatius Loyola, who wrote our constitutions, does not write into our constitutions a particular habit, a distinctive habit. He doesn't say what we are all supposed to wear. In fact, he gives us a few clues as to what we should be wearing, but he never says, here is what your distinctive habit should look like. Instead, he says this. This is paragraph 577 of the Constitutions. He says that our clothing should have three characteristics. First, it should be proper. Okay, so don't dress like a clown when you shouldn't be dressed like a clown, okay? First, it should be proper. Second, it should be conformed to the usage of the country of residence, or at least it should not be altogether different. So, I'm imagining wearing a cowboy hat in the middle of the Middle East or something like that. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Don't do that, right? Don't dress in such a way that you absolutely cannot fit in. Okay. Third, not contradictory to the poverty we profess, as would happen through the wearing of silk or expensive clothes. These ought not to be used, in order that in everything fitting, humility and lowliness may be preserved for greater divine glory. In other words, dress simply. Don't dress in rags, right? But also don't dress too fancy or anything like that. That's what he tells us. He doesn't say everybody should be dressed a certain way. He just tells us don't dress too fancy. Make sure you fit in some kind of way. Make it proper. Now, what does he mean by proper? For a priest, they tell us in the complementary norms a few more things that might help us get to where we need to be, right? In the complementary norms of the constitutions, it says, also in what pertains to food, clothing, and other external things, they will follow the common and approved usage of reputable priests. In other words, whatever the diocesan guys are doing, the reputable diocesan guys, do what they do, right? Do what they do. And there's your answer. That's why Jesuits don't wear the habit that you're thinking of. Jesuits don't wear a cassock every day. At least the Jesuits that you see don't wear a cassock every day, because most priests that you see, the diocesan priests, probably don't wear a cassock every day. If I'm in a place where they do wear a cassock every day, I'm going to wear a cassock every day, right? So, for example, if I go to St. Patrick's, which is here in New Orleans. St. Patrick's has the traditional Latin Mass, and they have a Novus Ordo Mass, which looks a lot like the traditional Latin Mass. And so if they ask me to go and fill in there, I'm going to dress exactly the way that those priests there dress, right? I'm going to wear a cassock. I'm going to wear a beretta, right, which is the sort of Jesuit hat that you might think of, right, from the old days, right? Well, their priests wear the beretta as well. I think their guys sometimes have a few distinct things about their beretta. Our beretta is just a tiny bit more simple. So is our cassock. Our cassock is a little bit more simple. So, for example, diocesan cassock will have lots and lots of buttons that go all the way up the front. The Jesuit cassock, that most of the time, if you've seen a Jesuit in a cassock, he was probably wearing a cassock without all of those buttons. He was probably wearing a cassock without the big cuffs around the edge, right? It's just a regular sleeve that kind of terminates at the wrist. Our cassocks do not have big pleats sewn into the back, right? They sort of fold in the back, but they don't have any big pleats sewn in back there. And then our cincture looks just like a diocesan cincture, with the exception that our cincture it's like a band of material that's about that thick, and it wraps around the priest a few times and then ties into a knot. The Jesuits tie our knots on the right-hand side. Diocesan priests tie their knots on the left-hand side. Custom. I don't know exactly why it's like that. I'm guessing it's out of custom. But the Jesuit cassock looks like a diocesan cassock from far away. When you get a little bit closer, you see it's very much the same. Sometimes the collars can be different, right? So sometimes the collar might look like this. Sometimes it might show a little bit of white all the way around the top. Or it might even close in the front where you don't see any white at all. There's a lot of variance there. In different time periods, you might have seen like rosaries hanging from the cincture of a Jesuit cassock sometimes. But it's whatever people do in that particular area, right? At that particular time, Jesuits typically dress about the way that diocesan priests dress, right? So sometimes if I'm at a football game, I might have on like a Jesuit sweatshirt on top of my clerical shirt or something like that. But I certainly dress like this every single day, unless like I'm working in a shop somewhere or working outside with a shovel. or hunting or fishing. I'm probably going to be dressed like this, right? Because that's how priests dress. You'll see that there are some times and places where Jesuits dress like lay people. Here are a few reasons why. First, there's some places where it was illegal to dress, and still on the books, illegal to dress the way that I'm dressed right now. People may not know this, but in Mexico, I think they're still on the books, these laws that say that priests are not supposed to dress this way out in public. They do, but it's a law. And so you might find Jesuits there much more likely to be wearing something simple, like a Guayavera shirt and slacks or something like that, That's a pretty common thing. If you go over to Poland, you're going to see them wearing the cassock every day, the old-fashioned Jesuit cassock, because that's what they do in Poland, right? So in Poland, they do that. In Sri Lanka, they might be wearing a white cassock with a black cincture, right? So pretty different if you happen to be in Sri Lanka and meet some Jesuits there, for example. But you will often see Jesuits doing what the diocesan priests are doing, which could include a lot of secularization, right? So you have a whole lot of places in the world where priests don't dress this way. And so the Jesuits, playing along with all that, don't want to appear like, hey, we're somehow status-driven or outward showy or something like that. So we might dress the way that diocesan priests dress. Of course, in the United States, most of the time they wear these kinds of clothes, but a lot of times when a priest is relaxing on the weekends or something like that, a diocesan priest may not wear clerics at all. And so Jesuits kind of follow that basic norm. I don't. I wear dress like this all the time, but you may see a lot of Jesuits who don't wear clerics for that reason. You might find that some Jesuits don't wear clerics because they are a Jesuit but are not a priest. So that includes Jesuit brothers. These are full members of the Society of Jesus, full members as Jesuits, but they never plan on getting ordained a priest. And so the kind of work that they're involved in may dictate how they dress, right? So a Jesuit brother who is a professor in a university might just dress with a suit jacket or whatever. A Jesuit brother who's working in the maintenance department in a big institution might dress like a maintenance man. Who knows, So it kind of depends on what they're doing for a living, right? Where they're working all the time. Sometimes Jesuit brothers do dress just exactly like this, right? They dress just like the priest would. Other times you have Jesuit scholastics, which are like seminarians. And there's a hard... Jesuit scholastics are scholastics for a very long time. And sometimes it's hard to be on a university campus, let's say, And it's hard if you wear the clerics because people think you're a priest, right? And you're typically older than most of the other students there. So, you look different if you dress like a priest, but you're not a priest, and that can be misleading. And if you don't dress like this, it could also be misleading, right? It can look like you don't have vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience or something like that. So sometimes it's just a hard decision that people have to make, and it's an awkward time for a Jesuit when it comes to how should we dress. Often the superior of the house will kind of decide for you, right? He'll tell you, you should be dressed this way. When you go to classes, you should be dressed some other way. I know a lot of Jesuits, for example, will dress like this on the first day of class so that everybody can recognize that they are different, that they're not, you don't ask them on a date or anything like that, right? But then after that, they'll dress like the other students as a way of kind of like saying, hey, I'm not really a priest, and you shouldn't treat me any differently than you treat other students, in the classroom or whatever. So you might see Jesuits dressed that way. And of course, when we're in the middle of some liturgical practice or something like that, we're probably going to dress all the right ways that you should dress whenever you're in that mode and doing that job. So I hope that explanation helps. Why don't Jesuits wear the habit anymore? Number one, we don't have a habit. Number two, we're wearing what we're supposed to be wearing according to our founder, St. Ignatius Loyola, and the constitutions of the Jesuits. Number three, there is something kind of distinctive about the Jesuit cassock. When we wear it, depends on where we are and why we might wear it in the first place. So I hope that helps.